My name is Simon Lehmann from AJL Atelier. And today I have a very special guest. It's a dear friend of ours and a well-known industry expert, Jeremy Gall, who is a founder of Breezeway based in Boston. Jeremy, welcome so much on the show today. Let us know where you're at, what you're up to right now, and what are the challenges you're dealing with.
Thanks, Simon. I'm excited to be here and it's great to see you. It's 2020. It's a challenging year for everybody. So where I'm at is right smack in the middle of 2020 still. I founded Breezeway. We're a property operations and services platform located here in Boston, helping professional operators all around the world be better at their jobs. And we're right in the thick of it, along with our clients, helping push through this new world. We'd love to all say post-pandemic, but I think we all know that it's not post-pandemic. It's just post the start of COVID-19 and a lot of the changes that have come along with that.
Yeah, isn't that very challenging that people say, they tend to say we're post-pandemic, but actually we're all realizing that we're only at the start of it and we need to see what comes out of it. So we always need to rethink about this and say, okay, what does that mean? And you already talked about this, Jeremy, and you just gave us the first great introduction in terms of technology. So also Breezeway is an additional piece of technology that can be used to run a property management company. And one thing I want to cover with you today in our conversation is obviously technology adoption, a new era of tech adoption for property managers. And let me start with the following and communicating maybe a bit of line about, European Vacation Survey that was conducted in 2019 by Transparent showed that 80% of property management company use a channel manager and 60% of PMS property managers, but only 20 use operational tech. Where is that disconnect? So obviously we understand that creating demand is extremely important, but the rest of the tech adoption, which we always said is very low, why is that still so low, and what can be done? And why are people so, I guess, worried in doing more tech adoption from you where you are?
Yeah, I think a couple of points to unpack there, which I think are pretty interesting. Like, one, I think the ecosystem around property management, professional property management, is still continuing to grow. And things like channel management were one of the first challenges as people, as more channels started to pop up and the PMS systems weren't capable to sort of keep up with 100 different channels, localized and optimizing for each one, but it was a real necessary piece of the marketing ecosystem. Channel managers grew up, and that happened years and years ago. Those have been around for a long time. So I don't think it's a surprise to see that adoption pick up. And I think when it comes to operations tech, I think the sun is still, coming over the horizon where people are starting to understand how important the operations piece of the puzzle is and how it fits into that ecosystem. So, we did a property operations survey this year as well, and it's really interesting. We heard the majority of people think this is one of the most important areas of their business that they need to focus on. And I think you'll see, Matt Landau's got some information coming out as well pretty soon. There's just a continued unpacking. It's scary. People don't want to have, these are complicated businesses that are not, many of them are not huge enterprises, they're not big corporate entities that are running this with an IT department that says, hey, great, let's pick up all the different pieces of technology that we need. But in fact, you're seeing a lot of these operators understand, like, that's what we have to do. We have to optimize. As long as the pieces work well together, this is the best solution for us. So I think you're still going to see that number grow. Can't wait to see the 2021 numbers and what that, the answer to that same question.
Do you think the numbers are to be grown by new entrants who use technology, or by the ones who are existing in it, and realizing what role technology adoption means to them, and it can improve their business going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's definitely two distinct personas in the vacation rental market, which is the new entrants who are coming in, who are looking at their technology stack right away and saying, okay, this is what's important to me. I'm going to pick my pieces of the puzzle and I'm going to pull them together. So that's one persona. Another persona is the existing company who has been, who started 20 years ago, 30 years ago, 50 years ago with one PMS, and then has slowly, kept adding to that all-in-one solution to optimize different parts of that wheel and different parts of that guest experience. And, we see great adoption between both. We see great adoption between both parties. And in fact, I think what we'll see, a really interesting question somebody needs to ask in 2021, maybe it's going to be AJL, is how long have you been on your PMS system, and how frequently are you switching? Because I think what we're seeing now, 10 years ago at FlipKey, you would have somebody, we would pick up a client, we knew their property management software system, and that was etched in stone. You could count on that being the system for the next 7 to 10 years. And I don't think that's the case anymore.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Jeremy, for the hint. I will keep that under my hood. And we'll think about this question in 2021. And I could not agree with you more. I mean, without a doubt. I mean, seeing now the switching barriers for PMSs or any other tech is being so low, and where, property managers seem to be pretty lightheartedly about changing if they see an improvement in what they do. One thing I want to go back to that we discussed earlier in relation to sort of pre-COVID and now COVID, has that done anything in relation to tech adoption in what you see? I mean, obviously the property managers before COVID, we were living in an extreme ideal world. Demand was growing. We couldn't do a lot of things wrong. Market was growing, business was growing. We had still demand growing, supply was growing. We needed to adopt a few things, optimize a few things, but hey, we were on a roll, right? And then demand dropped, and then people started to realize, what is my cost structure? I need to think about, survival. And if no demand is coming because I've taken the choice of being third-party dependent, I need to start thinking about my operating costs, creating efficiency and effectiveness. And obviously technology plays a super important part in that conversation. Have you seen any shift, or is it more reluctance right now in terms of cost, or what do you see in terms of tech adoption?
Yeah, I think wow, these are multi-part questions. I love it. You're keeping me on my toes here. So much to say about that. I think, look, first of all, COVID-19 in 2020 has been really challenging on the industry from a cost and from a revenue perspective. And so people have to be tight about what they're doing. And they have to be really, ruthless as they look back at their business and try to understand all the real levers of their business to drive profitability. And that makes a lot of sense. So we're definitely seeing that in the market. But we also see just as many folks saying, hey, look, we really can't get away with doing this the way that we used to before. We have to be really buttoned up about what's happening. We have to understand our protocols. We noticed that, and I've said this before, I don't think a lot of people changed everything that they were doing because there are a lot of folks who take this really seriously. So it's not like they've fully changed their operation, but they did really dial in the professionalism a little bit. And as they do that, they want to make sure that they're getting it right. And the best operators are continuing to, separate from the others by really focusing on quality and getting things right. And, some of this reminds me of stories that you've told in the past, where you go into a rental and the knives aren't sharp or there aren't enough pots and pans. I think now you also have to look at you go into that home and the silverware drawer is totally disorganized, where you've lost confidence in how clean and well prepared and how that property is maintained. I think you just can't afford to do that much anymore. And I think as an industry, we were already on this path in 2019. 2020 has just accelerated that machine to say, hey, look, what everybody wants is this authentic experience, but they want it in a really high quality way. And this is the accelerant of, we're no longer just a sleepy cottage industry. Like this is the real deal, and everybody needs to treat it like a real hospitality provider.
You sound to me like you're telling your kids a fairy tale when they're going to sleep, right? And is that, the question really, Jeremy, is that reality? I mean, obviously, you and I, we agree a ton, and I could say that we have many things in common, Jeremy, you and me. But one thing we have extremely in common, that we're very passionate about this industry, and what you just said is what we want to see happening, right? But let's face it, I sound like a broken record, but I've mentioned this Focusrite study several times that came out of the end of 19, saying that we're still capturing 70% of non-renters to come to our industry, and that was pre-COVID. And now think about what is happening in the hotel industry. I mean, just last week, we had an absolute landmark of one of the largest hotels in Zurich shutting its doors. I mean, that was just impossible to ever imagine. So it happened. So 400 room, which is large for a Swiss hotel, obviously, hotel is closed, which is a landmark in Zurich, has closed because it just can't run and operate business anymore. At the same time, we're still, as an industry, pre-COVID, trying to address 70% of travelers who have never rented, some of which have contemplated to rent, but then ultimately decided to take hotels instead. But this has gone way beyond. And now looking at the domestic travel numbers and everything else, such as me right now, again, staying in a Swiss chalet, being close away from home, but I'm at home where I am, which is great fun for the kids and the family and everybody else. This is going to be with us for a while. But in order to accommodate these other 70%, we ultimately need to lift our game in the industry dramatically. And we talked about this over and over and over again. I mean, when I met Brian Sharples in 2005, the people who rented, they always rented. So that was nothing new. But obviously that group grew to a certain level. And now it's stagnated at 30%. And that group does not seem to go larger because what that group expects to rent is something we can currently not accommodate. So going back to technology and operation standards, and we don't want to standardize our product as a hospitality product, we all agree, or a hotel product, but we need standards to put customers at ease so they know what they expect is actually going to be met as basic standards. What can technology do in that space? Number one question. Number two, what is the industry as a whole doing to get that better? Yeah.
The thing about fairy tales is, they always start with once upon a time, right? They don't happen overnight. There's a path. And I think we're on that path. It does sound like a fairy tale a little bit, but we're on that path to seeing and there's no stepping backwards. I guess that's the main point, right? That like there's just no stepping backwards once that starts rolling. And yes, over the last 10 years, it may look a little slow, but if you think about what this industry used to look like in 2005, it's massively it's so incredibly different. It's so incredibly different. Like people wouldn't book online. You couldn't book online. You could not book a property online. I mean, it's so incredibly different. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that in the fast pace of how this industry changes. But technology for standards is, you have to, and vacation rental managers and operators don't get enough credit for being early tech adopters. These are folks who are, despite the surveys, like these are folks who are always looking, the majority of them are always looking for an edge in their business for how they can leverage technology and different tools across a multidisciplinary business to be better at what they do, right? From marketing automation to operations. And when I think of operations, like technology is the promise to help you be more efficient and to help you automate and to help you feel really confident about what you're doing. That's why as a business owner, you leverage all this technology to help run your business. Like that's the whole game. And I think as far as standards go, that's going to continue to develop. I believe the platforms will help drive this as well. That's going to continue to develop into like, look, you just don't have a choice but to maintain a certain base standard of how these properties are taken care of and what a guest can expect. We're not going to sanitize vacation rentals in a way that they've lost all their character. But the whole industry is moving in a way that technology helps alleviate traveler concern, which I think will help grow the market. And I think we've already seen that with the juxtaposition of what's happening in hotels to vacation rentals. I mean, people are more comfortable renting a vacation home than going to a hotel.
Yeah, absolutely. But I want to, in terms of your entry sentence, when you said once upon a time, I want to pick up on that and said, in 2005, you were not able to book a vacation rental online. I have to, unfortunately, heavily disagree with you because I was running Interim at the time and you were able to book online with us. And what I want to get to at that part of the story is that, I had the honor and obviously pleasure to be on the board of HomeAway, and at one board meeting, one of the major investors said to the board, guys, as long as not 75% of our business is not coming out of Europe, we're not an international business. And obviously Simon Breakwell and we loved that statement very much, and we carried it ever since. And obviously HomeAway achieved to have their 75% market share out of Europe. But one thing that resonated in a way was like, we always said, number one, the European vacation rental business is a lot larger than anywhere else in the world, number one. And number two, it's far more established and older. And now, looking at all the tech startups who are disrupting the value proposition, the value chain of vacation rental, most of them are actually coming out of the US. And what do you see as a tech provider being US based, entering the European market? And when we talk about technology and all the challenges that you have in the US, you have from the Statue of Liberty to the Hollywood sign, you have pretty much one language. I wouldn't say one culture, but at least one language. And in Europe, it's a little bit different. So what are your challenges and how do you see technology adoption from the US to the European market? That might be interesting to the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think obviously there's foreign language, there's foreign language issues that you have in the European market that are really interesting, where it's not just the property manager as a customer not speaking English, but a variety of language barriers among staff and among service partners, where you may be located in Spain and the service partners and the folks you're working with are speaking Croatian and Polish and French and a whole bunch of languages that you don't even speak. So the technology issues there, where you can use a program to find commonality is quite helpful, so that you can train folks, make sure that they understand what they need to do visually and through checklists, help build that standardization. So I think that's one. I think more than foreign language though, what's really interesting about the European market is, yes, that market's been established for a long time, but there's an odd juxtaposition between, and you know more about this than anyone in the world probably, but there's an odd juxtaposition between the agency model and the full property manager model. And I think the European market is still coming to grips with how do we become full property service providers, and how do we really own this experience from the booking all the way through. And that, to me, in the European market is the much more interesting piece of the technology landscape, especially when it comes to operations, as you see lots of managers, big and small, pulling at the edges of that and trying to understand how they're going to adopt their business to be more full service and really provide that hospitality top to bottom.
I like that. That's awesome. And you and I have done hours and hours of preparation for this call, and we wanted to follow a script. But now you're just giving me a great exit of that script, and I would love to have a debate and conversation with you about it. So obviously, AJL is now working on this hospitality tutorial. We haven't talked a lot about to the public, but one piece of our strategy piece is talking about business models, right? And you just gave me the perfect reference point to talk about business models and how you see that differ. And I agree with you, And now when we're listing the different type of business models, I think my conclusion is that we're seeing more hybrid models. And obviously, you as a tech provider, you need to adapt that. What does the property manager really want to achieve with this business? Is he going full service, end to end, deep into the value chain and value proposition? Or is he actually just touching it and doing distribution alone? Where do you see things evolving? Because the way I look at the American market, interesting enough, the North American market is for me very traditional, all end-to-end, full service property managers doing nuts and bolts, maintenance, cleaning, check-in and check-out and everything, because the ownership structure of the particular owners is different. These, the owners are living in big cities, they're living far away from their properties, so they need somebody local. And we see that in Europe, it really differs by market. Whereas Spain, we have more full service property managers because the owners of these properties in India or in France or in the UK. Whereas in Italy, the secondary homeowners living close by to the property, and therefore they don't need a full service property manager because they can clean it themselves. They have their nonno helping out and cleaning the place and checking in and checking out people. How do you see the business model of the vacation rental industry evolving overall?
Yeah, I think that's exactly, I think you just summed up the current state perfectly. I think there's going to be a little bit of convergence. I think in the North American market, you're seeing a greater adoption, little bit at the edges of a more hybrid model, meaning you have some property managers who are feeling much more comfortable outsourcing more of their work, partnering up with a service provider. This is a trend we saw a few years ago. I don't think it hasn't really grown into being a majority trend. It's kind of just on the edges, but of managers in the United States splitting their business into two different P&Ls, two different companies, one on the front office, one on the back office, really just to provide themselves a little more accountability. Hey, can we make money doing this doing all this back office work? If we can't, then we should be thinking about outsourcing it, whether we outsource it internally to a sister company or to someone else. So I think you'll see a little of that convergence pulling at the edges in the US to be a little more hybrid. That'll take time, and I don't think it'll ever really materialize the same way it is in Europe. And I think in Europe, it's really hard, depending on how far you are, in my opinion, on that hybrid model. If you're really separated, it then becomes really hard to maintain quality. And that puts you at a significant disadvantage. And I think we're still at like mile, if we're running a marathon, we're at mile 2 or 3 on this quality spectrum over the next 4 or 5 years. And I think that will be the driver that will say, okay, look, what happens 2 or 3 years from now when to be more successful on Airbnb or VRBO, you really need to be providing some insight into how this property is cleaned and maintained. But you don't have that because you're totally separated. Like, that is going to put you at a disadvantage. That is bound to happen. I don't know if it's 2021 or 2023, but that is absolutely bound to happen in this industry because it has to. So I think that will be the driving force to say, okay, in the European market, we need to bring this a little tighter together. And technology can do that, right? Like if you then have insight, if you've got better insight into how that hybrid model is working for you and the people are working for you, and then you can share that insight back to the channels and externally from your business, well, now you've got it. Now you've got choice as to, do I want to bring this internally and I want to own it, or do I want to find the right partners and make sure those partners are executing to my standards? And then I can do either one, or I can fluidly operate across, I mean, you've seen this, I can fluidly operate across markets in different ways. Like maybe in the urban center, I'm going to take that in myself. And then on the outskirts, I'm going to separate a little bit.
Wow. So that really actually will increase the flexibility in the way you run your business model going forward. And I totally agree with you that we have these options now with the tech providers allowing us to have deeper conversations about what do I want to insource, what do I want to have outsourced, regardless of which technology is being used to ultimately get the job done. So we see that exactly the same way. Interesting enough, you said that we're only at the second mile of a marathon of about 5 years out. I think we have a lot of work to do. And if it's only the second mile, then we can only see a lot of upside going forward. But now coming back to our script, in terms of what has COVID done about standards and operating procedures and quality when it comes to technology? What can technology really do there? One thing maybe also from where I sat at the time, and it was interesting to watch from maybe an outside standpoint at AJL, to say, okay, everybody wanted to own this standard. And interesting enough, we start raising this topic at last Vacation Rental World Summit in Como already in 2019, when this standard conversation came. Can you standardize your business? We had a lot of different voices with Sasha Hausman, who said, we want to be in this industry because we love the diversity of the industry, and we don't need to build a hotel industry. And I think we all agree that we don't need to do that, and we don't need to bring standards up to a one bedroom in a Hilton. It's not going to be the same as a vacation rental all over the world. And I think we want to keep that. So we've understood that. But on the other side, we still need to do a lot to professionalize the business. And I think that's where the challenges really lie. And now with COVID-19, I think, I had my Red Shoes Talks number 4 with Humphrey Bowles from Guardhog was like, the COVID is the best thing that could have potentially happened to our industry. And, it's obviously a very bold statement for everything else that happens economically. And we obviously have not seen the entire impact in many different areas. And we will suffer from this crisis immensely. But at the end of the day, we have an opportunity now in vacation rental to drive this forward. And I would love to have your opinion on that in a larger context, number one, and then sort of breaking that down into the standards and how can that be influenced besides all the operating standards we had up till to our pandemic, and how is that being perceived going forward, and how can technology help us to provide a better execution of our business?
Yeah, I mean, I think technology, well, a couple things there, right? COVID helped promote and shine a light on a baseline standard of what needs to be done at a property to make sure that it's a safe, responsible, quality environment for the next humans to come and stay in that same space. You're going to take a space that a family or a group of people was staying in, and you need to get it ready and safe for the next person to come in. And I think COVID-19 highlighted, hey, look, there is a body of work, a baseline standard that we need to do to make sure this property is clean and safe for people to come in. And I think that helped set that up. Technology is there to doing that job, and doing it at that level requires executing across a standard of operation in a massive number of unique homes. And technology can help you do that most effectively. Can help you understand exactly what needs to be done, who needs to do it, who's the right person to do it, and did they actually get it done? Validating that the work was done, assigning it, coordinating it, soup to nuts. And there's no question that technology can help you do that more effectively and more efficiently. I think COVID-19 and that cleaning is just, when we talk about standards, in my opinion, a lot of people wanted to try and own the standard and say, and there's been chatter about this, not just last year, it's sort of been growing for years. But, the fact is, I think there's a baseline of standards. I think what the industry is going to gravitate towards is, there is a baseline. And then you can go above and beyond that and add your brand to that, add what's important to you as a company, what's important to how you manage the guest experience on top of that. But the very baseline is, hey, look, we are going to clean and prepare these rooms in a sanitary way, where everything is clean and you're sure you're going to have a safe experience. That includes minimum standards of how we're going to do laundry, which is a very complex and controversial topic. Probably the most controversial when it comes to cleaning. I don't think there's no controversy about the fact that, property needs to be cleaned and sanitized and disinfected. But when it comes to laundry, it gets a little bit more controversial, but there's a baseline standard there as well. Then it's about look, we are going to communicate with our guests in a baseline manner so that they feel comfortable coming to this property, so that they understand that the property is prepared. And then there is a baseline amount of preventative maintenance and safety that we are going to put into this property to make sure that we have done our work to be diligent, that something's not going to go wrong. That when you show up, the property is going to be safe. We will have done our routine preventative maintenance to make sure there's not going to be, to minimize accidents. And that's it. In my opinion, that's the standard. And then if you want to, and it's very baseline, and we should expect that everyone complies with that 100%. And then on top of that, if you want to go above and beyond and build in your brand standards, in particular with the guest experience and how that guest is going to interact with your brand and your property, by all means go for it and promote that and sing to the Swiss Alp hilltops about it, because it'll make a difference. But the baseline, I think, is non-controversial and is also I think it's non-negotiable.
I love it, Jeremy. And looking at the Swiss hilltops outside of my chalet window, they're pretty wide, so it's freezing out there, right? So let me pick up that point that you mentioned. I like that finish of your story, looking at the Swiss hilltops, and it's pretty freezy up there. And for me, the question was, while you're explaining that, and once again, I could not agree with you more, but for me, the question is, what is the ultimate result? So we started off with talking about, who owns it. Is the ultimate result that we're going to end up with labels in our industry, that there will be a label, and not necessarily a Breezeway label or whatever, but maybe a VRMA or an association rent responsibly label that says, if you rent responsibly and you fulfill these standards, then, this is the standard we're setting. Because I think you as where do you sit as a tech provider, Jeremy? I feel it's very dangerous for service providers and service suppliers within our industry to own certain labels. I think that's very conflicting, and who has the balance of what is the right standard or not. And to your point on bed linen and everything else, I could not agree with you more. I know PMs in Italy who drop them in plastic bags in front of the house, and then the people put them on themselves, and stuff like that. And we need to talk about bed linen and which surface has been sanitized and not. But for me, it's about the technology piece we mentioned, and then it's about the standard. And for me, the logic conclusion would be that we're going to end up with cleaning standard labels that property managers can use and say, hey, this property, if you rent this property, this meets standard XYZ of the Vacation Rental Association, however.
Yeah, I think totally agree with you. I don't think technology companies are going to own that. I think safety, I think we're doing some work around safety, which we can unpack that later, where
Yeah.
that might be an exception. But I think when it comes to cleaning and professional standards, right? Like it's just you've got HEDNA and you have the American Hotel and Lodging Association. You have these, when it comes to other hospitality verticals, you have these like really established standards and operations that already exist. And I don't think we've seen that develop yet in the vacation rental industry. I think someone like Verma is sitting in a good position to do that, in a very good position to do that. And they've made a lot of progress with their Safe Stay program that they announced with COVID this year. But I think it's like who in the industry, without saying it, like who has the breadth, who has the connection with the travelers, who has the market identity to set that up and provide that standard. I think we know who some of those players are, who will likely, who are in an opportunity, without saying their names, who are in an opportunity, who have an opportunity to say, hey, look, this is, and I don't think they even have to label it. I think they just have to say, hey, you know what? Like, this is, I don't think they have to come up with a label. I think they have to say, hey, look, we expect a baseline of how this is happening, and we're going to help surface that to travelers. What's really wild about the whole thing, though, right, is in April of this year, in March and April of this year, as the world was shutting down and we were thinking about what was going to happen with as travel resumed, managers were packing the reservation teams because they were convinced everyone was going to call with questions about their cleaning protocols and exactly how the properties were
And
cleaned.
it didn't happen.
And no one called. Everybody just, I want to go. I want to get out of here.
I couldn't agree with you.
And nobody asked any questions. And so I think it's not this, I think it's just something that will continue to develop over time because it will be just such a nice experience, right? You know exactly, hotels are commoditized. You know what's going to happen you and I could sit here and we could rattle off the 50 things that are going to be in 99% of every hotel's rooms in the world. And they're all going to be the same. And they're literally all going to be the same. And it's just vacation rentals aren't that way. And hopefully will never be that way because that's what's so great about them. So you have to think about the standards, I think, in a different way. It's just like revenue management, right? You can't just take everything from the hotel space and just plop it over into vacation rentals and think that it works the same way because it doesn't.
Yeah, I totally agree, especially on revenue management. Don't get me started because revenue management in vacation rental is more than broken. So we need to reinvent that, but we're on a good way to do that. And one thing we both agree is, the next logo that Airbnb is going to publish is not going to be the Stop COVID logo because nobody wants to own the responsibility either. And I think that's where the biggest challenge comes in. Who owns ultimately the responsibility? And depending on different markets, and in the US, as we know, is a bit more challenging than other European markets when it comes to responsibility. But ownership of a label, of a standard, can you imagine? Because at the end of the day, it's provided by a third party. So I personally believe that OTAs will never own that space at all. And since we're still remaining and going to continue to remain in a very hyper-local and fragmented industry, it's a long debate to see what the ultimate result of cleaning standards are going to be and who owns these standards. I think the verdict is still not out yet and needs to be defined. And at the same time, everybody's trying to get a piece of that and doing it as it's best. And as you just pointed out, at the end of the day, people book whatever and they don't know if every surface that they're touching is actually going to be sanitized, including the remote control for the television and everything like that as well. So I think we need to sort of, as we say in German, keep the church in town and see how things evolve. And I think that's what's going to happen. Looking at time and having progressed exceptionally well, and I'd love to continue this conversation, there's a couple of things I want to touch with you before we talk about safety, which is a huge, more Anglo-Saxon issue as well, in terms of when it comes to travel and everything else. Is about, I want to quickly go back to tech adoption and talk about what are your obstacles talking to property managers who have no technology adoption? What is your biggest challenge to convince them to actually get them involved into a tool such as Breezeway, to actually help them to do a lot of their tasks, which they normally do on a manual basis and have done for ages with their service providers or within in-house services? What is the biggest obstacle, and what are they feared about in adopting technology such as Breezeway instead of doing it manually the way I've done it in the past?
Yeah, I think it's education. It's an education exercise as an obstacle to talk to property managers about, look, this doesn't, we're not building, it's no fun. And not only is it not fun, but it's not a successful recipe to build technology for the way business is today, or the way it was yesterday, right? I mean, successful technology products are trying to build technology and solutions that will help their clients operate the way that business is going to run next year and the year after that, and be forward thinking about what's going to happen. And so I think a lot of it is education with property managers and with the market about, hey, look, this is changing. And last year you could get away with manual processes and doing that, but next year it's going to be harder and harder for you to do that. And the job is going to develop to be harder and harder. And this is the promise of, automated operations and a tool that's purpose built to help you get this job done. And I think as far as a fear goes, look, I mean, we're not, folks are not sitting around fearing the robots are coming, and feeling AI, and fearing AI. I think the fear is just, hey, look, I don't want to I think there's two things. One, of course, cost and managing the business. And am I going to make more money with this tool? Am I going to save enough money to get a positive ROI on adopting this technology? I think that's a pretty simple conversation. And probably the harder conversation is, look, a lot of these companies have a very small management team, right? It's the owner, or maybe it's a GM of the business, and they have their hands full in a complicated business. And adding another piece of technology can be daunting because you just don't want to. You only have so much mind share that you can put to all these different tools, and you don't want to find yourself in a position where you're using so many tools that you've lost the benefits. You've lost the benefits of them. And that is a realistic fear. That's a legitimate and very rational fear that we talk to folks about all the time. And but nevertheless, it's the same as any other piece of technology. Like, you have to keep moving the business forward and thinking about how you optimize pieces of the business.
But I guess there is an additional button, Jeremy, that you could sort of press, and that's a safety button, right? So in several articles, you have hinted at safety being an important part of professionalism in our industry, and we all agree to that. And quality for vacation rentals. Recently Justin Ford joined your team, and you've been on national news in the US discussing vacation rental safety. And if you would trigger me about safety being a property manager, then you get me into a different level of attention. And maybe you can tell us quickly what's happening there as well. We talked about cleaning standard, we talked about operation, but now we talk about safety, which can be anything else, in terms of the pool, in terms of fencing, in terms of fire, everything that is around the property. I mean, that is a pretty important aspect as well, and sourcing technology that helps me to improve my safety standards within my property would obviously be an immediate trigger, obviously, to avoid any potential lawsuits in the future by travelers.
Yeah, I think that as an industry, there's just as much as there's variety. I would argue that there is more variety in how property is maintained from a preventative maintenance and safety perspective than there is from a cleaning perspective. So I think if you took the best operator in the, pick the best operator in the vacation rental space and then compare that person to maybe not necessarily the worst rent by owner, but maybe close to the bottom, right? And the difference in their cleaning is it will be material, but you're still going to be in the same spectrum, right? But I think when it comes to safety and preventative maintenance, there is massive variety and very severe implications. Putting COVID aside, the difference between a very clean property, in 2019, the difference between a very clean property and a so-so clean property, it's kind of disgusting and it's a bad guest experience, but it's not life or death. It's typically, other than COVID-19, it's not life or death. But it is truly, life or death if people are being irresponsible and not professionally thinking about how they maintain their property. And we know that this is the case. We know that this is the case, not just with rent by owners. We know this is the case with, I know it's sounding fairy tale-ish again, but because I'm passionate about it. Like, we know it's the case with professional managers who have to fight tooth and nail for their owners to do upgrades and for their owners to repair their deck because it's 20 years old and the owner doesn't want to take the expense because they're waiting for more rental income or they're trying to sneak by another year. And we just, as an industry, I don't think we can continue. You want to get the rest of the market share up. I don't think as an industry we can continue to do that. And I think the channels and the platforms understand that as well, that there is this growing need to understand exactly how these properties are maintained and provide some validation about it. And Justin Ford's been doing a lot of that. We think there's a major opportunity to help in that arena and say, hey, look, like, we can help train and educate many more people about how properties should be maintained from a safe perspective. And then we can help validate. We can help validate whether or not folks are checking their smoke alarms and whether or not they're doing the general work as you look up and try and find one in your rental. It's tough,
Excellent, Jeremy.
You have a fireplace in that shower.
Being mindful of time. And, I was just thinking, I couldn't have closed it better than what you have, obviously. With safety and preventative maintenance, we can do a lot more than everything else that you and I have talked about. And if time would permit, I would now take my laptop and walk through this chalet that I'm currently renting with my family. And our list will be endless, right? I'm sitting in a wooden built chalet. There's not a single fire alarm in this entire property. We have obviously a fireplace downstairs in the living room. And I'm currently here with 3 children, my mother-in-law, my wife, in a 5-bedroom chalet. And, preventative maintenance and safety is far bigger than any cleaning standards and anything like that for us going forward. So Jeremy, I would like to thank you thoroughly for your absolutely amazing insights. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you. I think one of the big takeaways that I've taken from our conversation today, Jeremy, is that we're only 2 miles into a marathon, lifting our standards and about 5 years out and where we need to be when it comes to technology adoption and providing better operating standards to deliver a better guest experience and making owners conscious about safety and preventative maintenance. And yes, we have a lot of work to do. And I think our guests can help us to improve that and speed that up. But one thing that will stay unique to our industry, we're dependent on secondary home ownership. We're dependent on trust, and therefore we need to strongly build these relations to homeowners and make sure our value proposition gets to them as well, and they understand actually what we do to improve the quality and the standards of a vacation rental. So Jeremy Gall, great to have you today. I would love to give the final word to you, and you can close it from here. Thank you so much for joining Red Shoes Talks.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure as always to chat with you, and we appreciate you having me on the show. And I think you just hit it really well. Like, I think the industry's rightfully focused on quality, and we're going to see professional operators, big and small, really rise to the occasion here over the next couple of years. And I think the future looks incredibly, incredibly bright. Despite the challenges, like that's the fun part. And we look forward to, I haven't been in this industry as long as you, but it's been 15 years, and so much has changed, and we're really looking forward to, we have a ways to go in 5 years, but we can do it, and it's going to be a fun 5 years as this industry continues to grow. So thanks so much for having us.
Without a doubt. Thanks, Jeremy.